There's so much to talk about in this particular subject of ascension through the ages, and it's particularly poignant right now in light of the current events that are going on. I've been talking extensively about this alliance that seems to be working to help us out on the global level to stop some of the most egregious crimes that are happening on the world stage today. This is something that's come to me through briefings. This is something that's come to me through meeting people in person who actually work within this alliance. It is not a conspiracy theory, it is a fact. And there is a long trail of evidence going way the heck back showing how long this thing has been at work. So I just want to be clear in saying that my work focuses my work focuses on lots of different things, and if you've come to this work through my material on the Alliance, and then you're saying, well, okay, David's talking about people being arrested, and he's talking about tribunals, how does this relate to the idea of ascension? And I believe the two are fundamentally interconnected, and I want to try to establish some of why that is. So, first of all, with the topic of ascension, this was a very strange thing that was coming to me from dreams ever since I was very, very young. 2 years old and up is when I start to have dreams where I'm seeing some sort of flying craft hovering over the ground. It was like it was wobbling. And this was some kind of cylinder, but it didn't have wings. And then I also had experiences with a person inside that container where he looked like Obi-Wan Kenobi. Sorry, Obi-Wan Kenobi, after I saw Star Wars in 1977, that's who this old man became when I'd have these dreams. And he was telling me that there was going to be something very phenomenal that would happen to the whole planet as we go through this mass evolutionary event. And I have been led to believe this all my life. The man was telling me I was going to become a very famous spiritual figure, actually ever since about 2 years old is when I remember having these dreams. And it was also interesting, my father was writing about rock and roll for the local papers, and so whenever anybody would come into the Albany-Schenectady area of upstate New York, we would end up meeting them backstage. So I got to meet many of the top rock and roll bands of the late 1970s and 1980s. I was put on a motorcycle at the Grateful Dead concert as an example. I believe I met Jerry Garcia. I don't remember, I was too young. But I definitely remember meeting Mickey Hart, and he was the drummer from the Grateful Dead. I've met so many of these types of people. It was an interesting thing to meet them and realize that they're ordinary people like you. They're not anybody special. They're just an ordinary person having an extraordinary experience. And I believe that part of why I had that all happen to me was to understand that, first of all, being a public figure is not what it's cracked up to be. Almost everybody I met backstage, they were very unhappy, and they were basically prisoners of the tour bus. So I've tried to do the career my own way. I don't want to spend a lot of time on the road. It's obviously better for me to do something like this at home than to have to travel to various locations around the planet in order to do that. And that really does help, because I'll tell you what, when you saw these guys and you got to talk to them and they're living on a tour bus, it was a rough existence for them. So let's bring up another cosmic background for you guys to on our slides here. This is a really good illustration of the geometric nature of the universe. It's a plexus thing, but I like the idea of what it shows you. So anyway, ascension is a very interesting topic, and it's something that has been near and dear to my heart for a long time. We are learning a lot about the universe. We are learning that there is a geometric underpinning, as I said in the previous broadcast, and there's so much we can talk about with that. If you remember, I was discussing the work of two scientists from Caltech, Nima Arkani-Hamed and Yaroslav Trunka, who actually showed that all the squiggles in the quantum realm appear to be emanations from a single object, and the object is fundamentally built off of a tetrahedron, And they have a different view of how it works than I do. But the point is, it is all tetrahedral. So this concept of the tetrahedron being a Merkaba, as it appeared in, for example, ancient Tibetan artwork, it is the Hebrew Star of David, it is the Masonic square and compass, and though the Masonic symbol is now often associated with negative things, I believe with this, as with many other things, that the initial intention of the material that was brought through to us was positive. The G representing God, the ruler representing what you draw the lines with, and the compass representing what you draw the circles with. It is essentially talking about sacred geometry, and it appears that whoever did this, whoever gave this to us, was some sort of extraterrestrial consciousness trying to give us a clue as to the real intrinsic nature of reality. So once you get down to that geometric model, you're dispensing with a lot of mainstream false ideas about particles because we're no longer dealing in a particle framework. This is very important. When we look at the geometry of the nucleus, and I don't have slides for this right now, we do have some cool slides today, but Dr. Robert Moon, who was one of the people who worked on the nuclear bomb, actually, in the 1980s came up with a new model of the nucleus where he realized that the protons were actually corners of geometric patterns. And I've talked about this a lot in my various lectures. We're not going to get into this too much. Suffice it to say, I've done many hours about this stuff. It's in my books. It's in my television shows. We'll probably discuss it in this upcoming Ascension Mystery School class that I'm going to be doing. And the idea being that it's not a particle down there in the nucleus. It's actually a vibration because geometry is what we see when, for example, we take a drop of water with a little bit of sand in it. Normally that would look like a milky, cloudy liquid. But then when you vibrate it, for some strange reason, all the particles turn into sacred geometric patterns, including the tetrahedron. So what am I saying? Wow, that's a lot of stuff to take in. I'm saying that the actual shape, structure of the atomic nucleus appears to be a vibration at its core, not a particle. And then you have to say, well, what is it that's vibrating? There appears to be some sort of liquid-like substrate that actually is what's vibrating. There's some sort of essence to the universe that we don't actually get to see. We only get to see the crystals of it when it vibrates. And that's a whole lot of esoteric science that there's a lot of great research to back up. We're not going to really get into that too much here, but I do want to remind you also from the previous episode, the real crown jewel, I think, is the work of Dr. Luc Montagnier, where he showed us that you can take a drop of water, actually a little vial of water, and then you have another vial of water next to it that has some DNA in it. You vibrate both of them with a 7 Hertz electrostatic field. Dr. Luc Montagnier, as I was saying, he's got this whole science where he takes the tube of water, before I was so rudely interrupted by that plane, that's got DNA in it, and another tube that's plain water. You wrap electrostatic coils around it, you run 7 Hertz through it, which is the Schumann resonance, or the base frequency of the Earth, and lo and behold, what do you get? After 18 hours, the tube that only had plain water in it grows little DNA guys that you can actually see in a microscope. And I love it when people try to say that this is pseudoscience or this is ridiculous. Well, just because he won a Nobel Prize, that doesn't mean anything. Really? A Nobel Prize winning scientist is not good enough for you? It's only because we stick to our preconceived biases. We're not ready to take that leap, which is that the universe is built on the quantum level to make life. That something as simple as H2O, hydrogen and oxygen, the simplest compound you could ever imagine, is all the way out there making this stuff happen, turning into DNA, just from energy. It's unbelievable. And it suggests that the universe is all germy, right? There's DNA everywhere. There's stuff everywhere that's alive. I don't know. Maybe I don't want to go out into space after all. Well, the cool part is, though, that not only does life get made out of the quantum fields, but it appears that life can be evolved from the quantum fields. In other words, we have to really rethink the universe. We're used to seeing all these arcane equations and thinking that only through algebra are you going to solve these mysteries. If we redefine it, instead of something you need 5 PhDs to understand with all this arcane math, instead take it from the level where it is a living universe and there are very sophisticated, intelligent quantum fields that push water into becoming DNA, literally reshaping alchemically the molecules. That's what this Nobel Prize-winning scientist, Dr. Luc Montagnier, actually discovered, but it's a paradigm shift. We're not quite ready as a collective to embrace something that heavy. Because once the universe is conscious, I actually went ahead of it, right? I was going to say once the universe is alive, once the universe is alive, it's conscious. Why? Because DNA makes conscious beings. Therefore, if DNA is like a map for all the complexities and the little noodles in your brain, the DNA makes that brain, right? It has the information to make the brain then thinks. Consciousness becomes the substrate. Consciousness becomes the origin of the universe. There is something consciously directing that water to turn into DNA. It doesn't happen by some weird mathematical formula. It's an intelligence. And when you get into the deep meditative practices like the Tibetan Buddhists, who we're going to talk about today, what they're seeing is that the consciousness is available to you. You can access universal mind instantaneously. Now, how do you do that? There are 2 main principles the Tibetans talked about. You focus on awareness and you focus on emptiness. It sounds simple enough, but it's actually very profound. What they would do, you're up there in the Himalayas, meditating in the mountains. You imagine that you are the mountains, that you're looking at this incredible view. You project your identity into that view. You see your consciousness as being those mountains. And that's your awareness. So you become aware of the awareness that is everything, that all is made from awareness. That's the meditation. And then you become aware that it's empty, that there is an underlying intrinsic emptiness in which there is no form that all things emanate from. Now, what did we say before about these 2 guys from Caltech that hacked the mystery of quantum physics? It's all coming off a little Merkaba, the tiniest object and also the largest object in the universe. All matter, all form comes from something that is ultimately just a shape, a vibration, intrinsically formless without space and time. It's a very, very trippy concept. And as I love to say when I'm at a conference, there's one guy in the back on 3 hits of acid and he knows exactly what I'm talking about. I get it, dude. Well, anyway, the point is, this awareness is empty and you can access it. And when we find people who give us inspiration, we're getting closer and closer to that awareness, that feeling of inspiration, that sense of being electrical, that sense of being in love. We just had Valentine's Day. There's something about that feeling of inspiration, that feeling of love, that feeling of excitement, that feeling of awe that is getting us really close to that original mind that we are. Because when these meditators would get to this state properly, invariably they are in an ecstatic bliss, which the Hindus would call nirvana. And there's various names for it in other cultures. The point is, you really, really feel great when you get reconnected with the universal mother light, as the Tibetans called it. And one of my great friends and colleagues, Dannion Brinkley, is sort of the pioneer of the near-death experience, bringing it out in his book Saved by the Light, which is one of the biggest bestsellers you could ever imagine. It still sells very well. And he's talking about the afterlife experience. He's talking about what it means to have died clinically, no breathing, no heart rate, no brainwave activity, but yet you have this experience and you end up finding this light. That's a much more powerful version of what I'm talking about in an NDE, or near-death experience, than the meditative empty awareness concept. If you're meditating, you get really deep, you might get a taste of that, but really there's nothing quite like the near-death experience. Anyway, what we ultimately discover as Daniel, goes through this, and he's talked about how he had a very weird, vibrationally disarranged life. That's not even a word. I just made that word for you. Disarranged. Anyway, we could say dysregulated. Vibrationally dysregulated. That is a word. He went from this life that was very dysregulated, where he was actually doing some very nefarious stuff. He goes to the afterlife. He has this amazing awakening experience. And what does he realize? The same thing that many others have realized if they have this happen, which is, you are a spiritual being. You are here for a reason. There is an agenda for your life. You are not here just to try to get ahead before the whole S-house goes up in flames, right? That's the Jim Morrison quote. I just want to get my kicks before the whole thing goes up in flames. No, you're here to create value for other people. You're here to love. You're here to be growing spiritually. Now, another thing that becomes a very obvious iteration of this spiritual enlightenment that people get is the concept of reincarnation. Reincarnation is a very interesting idea which was supported in the early Christian teachings. In fact, one of the founding church fathers named Origen said that the greatest hidden secret of Christianity was reincarnation. He was talking about that the greatest hidden secret of Christianity, which came directly from one of the apostles to his teacher and then to him, was that Jesus was actually teaching reincarnation. So, there are a couple clues in that you can find in the Bible if you're interested in Christianity. And again, I try to do interfaith. I'm not pushing any one religion, but I like to look at these various faiths in terms of where did all this energy come from that makes millions of people, if not billions of people, believe in a supernatural force. Christianity, of course, has 38,830 different denominations. Think about that. Different actual sects of Christianity. 38,830. Clearly, it had a major effect. Was there an actual man, Jesus? It sure looks like it. And we're going to talk about that Shroud of Turin a little bit later on here. But I want to get to the underlying point, which is why do we have religion? We have religion because really cool guys or women show up and they do amazing things. They do things that blow our minds. They do things that expand our awareness, that make us feel that electrical inspiration that, as I said, is getting really close to the original mind of the universe. So when you have that mind gating into your consciousness, you will feel very inspired. And you look at these churches, you look at these mosques, you look at these temples, you look at these centers. They are built to try to inspire you with that sense of awe. You go in, you're looking around, you're looking at the ceiling, you're like, wow, look at all this great stuff. Look at these stained glass windows. Look at this, look at that. It's all part of creating the awe, the music, the incense. You know, a lot of incense has chemicals in it called sesquiterpenes, which actually activate your pineal gland and get your psychic senses going. So there's a whole science to this. It's very interesting, including the pyramids. And the original purpose of these pyramids was a chamber of initiation that actually raises your consciousness. So what I'm saying is that there appear to be supernatural beings out there in the universe. And the real interesting aspect of how this relates to reincarnation, first of all, Jesus was teaching reincarnation. And you can see this in a couple different places. There was a question asked to Jesus where people asked him, who has sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? This man sinned, so he was born blind? How could you have sinned, which just means transgress against universal law? How could you transgress against universal law and then be born blind? As if the people are saying, well, maybe the reason why he's blind is that he got in trouble in another lifetime and he had bad karma. Yes, that's exactly what it's saying. When Jesus showed up, there's this quote where they're saying some people think he is Adam, some people think he's Elijah the prophet. He came back. He did it again. Well, the Catholic hierarchy didn't like that. They want to stuff that stuff down because that teaching gives you too much freedom. If you die, you're not going to burn in hell. You just come back and you do it again. You get to try again. And I've also looked at a very interesting website, Bible Reality Check, written by a Christian, where she, I believe it's a woman, it's just 2 initials as the first name, and that's a pretty big clue sometimes if a woman's trying to not be judged by being a woman, she's going to use initials. This was a common thing they did in the early 20th century, actually, authors of various types. And actually, James L. Tiptree Jr., who wrote Brightness Falls from the Dawn, James was a woman, and she changed her name to a man so that she'd be respected as a sci-fi author. I believe that's what the book was called. Anyway, I had a sci-fi class in college where we talked about this. Anyway, the Bible Reality Check website shows you that this concept of hell, the word that they use to translate as hell is Gehenna. Now, what was Gehenna? Gehenna was the garbage dump outside of town where they burned dead bodies so that they were no longer going to putrefy and infect people with dangerous viruses and diseases. So Gehenna is a fire of purification, a karmic fire. And then eon, or eternity, the word eon just means a cycle of time. So this idea of burn in hell for all eternity is a mistranslation of Gehenna and eon, which actually means go through a karmic purification for a cycle. And an eon could be the cycle of a person's life. An eon could be an hour. An eon could be a day. It could be a year. There's all different ways to use that word in its traditional usage. So we don't want to get stuck on this idea of eternal hellfire. That is a total mistranslation. But then it does have an interesting corollary, which is where this misunderstanding got originated, which is that there's this interesting eschatological or end-time discussion in the Bible. And this gets into the idea that there is going to be some sort of fire from the heavens, that there is going to be some sort of burning event. And I don't have that in my slides here, but there are a number of quotes from the New Testament that describe some sort of what we're now calling this solar flash event, in which it is compared to the biblical flood of Noah. It's compared to the fire and brimstone of Sodom and Gomorrah. Wait a minute. How could a loving, benevolent universe authorize this catastrophe? Why would a loving being like Jesus be talking about, like in the book of Matthew, that we will be separated like sheep from the goats? And of course, what does this do? This breeds fundamentalism. This very misappropriated idea from the book of Revelation that only 144,000 people are going through this process, right? Well, maybe it's us. There's 38,830 denominations of Christianity. Probably a lot of them have this end-time speculation going on, right? So we're not really stuck in thinking there's only 144,000 people. I'm not pushing that at all. It was only metaphorical. And there's some gematria, this science of biblical numbers about the number 144 and what that number really means. That's what's key. It has nothing to do with the actual number of people. We don't know how many people are going to go through this, but that is the core of Ascension. That's the core of what I started to have this old man who looked like Obi-Wan Kenobi talking to me about all the way back when I was 2 years old, getting me to expect that something like this would happen within my lifetime, and that I would figure this stuff out and go forward with it. So we got to talk about reincarnation a little bit more here, because in my research I have made dramatic conclusions that reincarnation is real, and I direct you back to the work of Dr. Ian Stevenson, who researched some 3,000 children, mostly in the Middle East, who accurately remembered who they were in another lifetime. And in well over 1,000 of these cases, he was able to actually do the follow-up and find out that they remembered accurate details. They remembered the picture that was on the wall in the house. They remembered people's names. They remembered where they lived. They could take the researcher there. They knew the address. They knew the names of the people they lived with. In some cases, he even solved murders. And the weirdest thing of all was that their face actually would match who they remembered being before. It's not exactly the same. It's slightly different. But again, this shows that there is some deeper aspect to the way you look beyond the heredity of what you got from your parents. And it gets again into this interesting idea about DNA appearing in a drop of water, the idea that your facial features have some sort of energetic signature that impose upon your physical body to make you look more like this image of your deeper soul. So if you are reincarnating, let's just take that as a fundamental principle, which again, we could argue about that for hours. And at this point, it's too late to get mired in the argument. If people don't want to believe this, you can't make them, you can't force them, and that's okay. Don't fight them. But if you are hip enough to get to the idea that this is happening, and then see that the research is already there, Dr. Ian Stevenson, his heir apparent, Dr. Jim Tucker, where they've got forensic facial police matching software, where the face matches up with who you were in your previous life when you remember the details. Then the question becomes, okay, well, if you're not going to burn for all hell eternity, right, when you die, if you're not saved, or whatever it is, because remember, there's a lot of different religions that have variations of this, okay? If you just reincarnate, and you're not stuck in some eternal hellfire, then what's the point? You know, why are we coming back over and over again? When you have that near-death experience, you get to a deeper intrinsic reality, which is that you have this higher self. That is the part of you that is dreaming, the part of you that is authoring your dreams. The higher self is telling you what to do. As much as possible, it's trying to steer your spiritual evolution. It does this through synchronicity. It does this through dreams. It does this through visions. It does this through hunches. Strange, you'll get an itching sensation. You'll have this pressure in your ears. Funny things like that happen that once you start awakening, you'll be like, wow, why does this thing keep happening to me? Why am I seeing these numbers on the clock? Why am I having this experience? Why do I know who it is when the phone is ringing and I'm not looking at the caller ID? Why do I just happen to bump into this person who I know when I'm in the grocery store? I had no idea you were going to be here. Well, I didn't know you were going to be here, These things are not accidental. And what we're starting to learn more and more about from the secret space program side of the discussion is that we are surrounded by extraterrestrials. They're here right now. They're probably in the room with you right now as you're listening to me talk. You can't see them because they're slightly out of phase, but almost everyone who is on an awakening trajectory has these guardian angels. Now, the weird thing is that they do apparently have physical flesh and blood bodies. It took me a long time to figure this out. That they are actually physical beings who can be shot and killed, but when you feel them as a presence in the room, most likely that's because they're projecting out of body to be there with you. They might be somewhere else where they're more safe. They only approach you in a spiritual form, but they do have a corporeal body. So imagine how strange it is when you're dealing with people from the national security state and they start having these UFO crashes going on, and there's dead bodies inside these UFOs of people that look like us. But they're not us. They might be different. They might have different colored irises. Their ears might look a little different. Their nose might look a little different. They might be a little taller. They might be a little shorter. They might have a slightly different skin color, or maybe a radically different skin color. But they're still basically human. Then you go back through history, and what do you find out? That every ancient culture has reports of human-looking beings, but they're not quite like us. They levitate. They have these amazing teachings to give us. So that's one of the really cool things that we keep going into here, is that these beings have been here the whole time. They probably have time travel capability. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that. So when you look at something from the ancient past, don't think about it as 5,000 years old. Don't think about it as 700 years old. Think about it as beings that could just as easily be here now as they were there. And what are they doing? They're installing information about the times that we are in now. They programmed mythology with code to tell us something, to give us a prophecy about where we are today. And that is the basic idea of ascension. That is what's so exciting about this. The idea that there is something deeper going on there, and that these beings were bringing that to our attention. Those beings also apparently are still talking to people in the national security state. There are benevolent beings that are doing their best to try to get through the military mindset, to try to say, look, you guys, would you please disclose? Would you please tell the public that we exist? And what do they want to do? They want to do spiritual education. They want to teach us about how to be more loving. They want to teach us about how to be better people. They're interested in finding a way for us to stop killing each other and saying, my God is better than your God. And don't you think that's a good thing? Nobody is saying that you have to give up your religion. But instead of acting as if there's only one right way, that is a reductionist view. What if there are different glorified beings who came here with this contact with intelligent infinity? And they gave us information that can liberate you. Because if you look at Christianity, you look at the people who really got into it, they became saints, the people who practiced it the hardest, who really tried to apply what Jesus was telling them. And you find out that they're levitating, you find out that they can walk through fire, you find out that they're appearing in people's dreams, they can bilocate, and they get canonized as saints. But what's interesting is that there are other cultures that have this happen as well. Other cultures where people actually go through an ascension type of experience. Tibet being a wonderful example because there's 160,000 documented cases of people activating a so-called rainbow body. And that rainbow body is capable of all kinds of cool stuff. These people would push their hand or their foot into a solid rock and leave behind a footprint or a handprint. And there are many, many places throughout Tibet, India, Nepal, Bhutan, and China where those imprints still exist, and there are shrines built around them, and people go there and they pay a pilgrimage to see these footprints and handprints. So this is not speculation. Something is going on here. There's a way to break out of that cycle of reincarnation. There's a way to get the point of what these higher beings want you to know. And the higher beings are still here now. They've had the frustration of having to work through this deep state that precisely does not want you to know they exist. But I have so many different insiders who have worked at levels of secrecy well above the classification of need to know for the President of the United States. At cosmic clearance, you're 35 levels of need to know above the President. That's a very, very heavy classification level. At that level, they know that these beings exist. They know that these beings are benevolent. They know these beings have superpowers. And they know these beings have a spiritual agenda, but they still don't want you to know. Or at least they haven't yet. But these beings want to be heard. They got heard more in the ancient times, and they installed information that is relevant for us today. So I want to take you through some of that now. We have some slides. This is the world debut of David Wilcock. That's me. Yeah, I just talked about myself in third person. How lame is that? Uh-oh. David Wilcock's slides. Yes, I just did it. So here we go. Let's go to the first slide here. The Law of One series is what really put this all together for me in 1981 through 1983. And it was called originally the raw material. Now, some of the folks who are, we can go back to camera. Some of the folks who are of the Christian orientation get really, really upset that the name of the source of the Law of One is Ra. And there's an important clarification that we have to make on that, which is that the original Ra that came to the Egyptians some 12,000 years ago was benevolent, very benevolent. And in fact, the Great Pyramid of Giza was a monument to the coming Christ. And there's all kinds of great stuff that shows us that. The proportions of the pyramid, the actual granite sarcophagus inside the king's chamber has precisely the same size dimensions as the Ark of the Covenant in the Old Testament, even though supposedly nobody had gotten into the king's chamber then because it wasn't discovered until Caliph al-Mamun somewhere in the 800s AD region, okay? So there's a really cool bunch of information that we could talk about regarding the pyramid and what was the pyramid's original intention. But as it is explained in the Law of One, this benevolent message got distorted by the priests and the peoples of Egypt. And they took it from something positive into something extremely negative. They're bringing in this really, really sick stuff with human sacrifice, with occult rituals and ceremonies. I'm not going to get into too much detail or else we'll get demonetized, which has already happened a couple times. Suffice it to say, it got all backwards. But the original teaching was supposed to be positive, and so this source came back in 1981 and worked through a group of people that were doing research through telepathic communication, and the source of the Law of One, Carla Ruckert, was completely unconscious, had no memory of what she was saying when she came out of those sessions. So the Law of One is a very, very heavy body of teaching, and it got me hip to the idea that there was going to be some massive transformation of the world. They keep talking about it. It's like the only thing they're really concerned with is trying to get the numbers up for ascension. And they keep saying in the Law of One that most of us are not going to be ready for this thing. Well, that's a very difficult concept, because what they're really saying is, in order to be ready for this type of ascension, which does appear to have a quantum leap event, some sort of, as we're now seeing the solar flash, all you have to do is be slightly above 50% interested in helping people, loving people, being kind, being compassionate, rather than being manipulative, evil, conniving, and deceptive. So it's a very great idea to be nice. You really want to think about that, because just in case all this crazy stuff I'm telling you turns out to be true, I don't know about you, but I'm done with reincarnation in this third-dimensional world, getting poison ivy, getting diarrhea, vomiting, getting your heart broken, getting betrayed, people steal from you. I'm freaking done with it, okay? I'm ready for the fourth density that they talk about in the Law of One, which is 100 times more harmonious than life in third density. I'm ready for superpowers, telepathy, levitation, telekinesis, time travel, bilocation. I'm ready for UFOs, off-planet bases. This is the world that those people live in when you get to that level. You become part of space. You become part of a galactic community. But you have to go through this maturation process. You have to grow up. You have to learn from the illusion. This is the biggest teaching in the Law of One of all, I would really have to say, that the world is an illusion. We are not living in a typical materialistic universe as we think. There is a direct relationship between what we do and the results that come back to us in our life. And it seems so simple, and if you're a spiritual person, for you it probably is really simple, and it drives you crazy like it does with me, that people can't see the most obvious, this is what happens when you're live, you start coughing, the most obvious relationship between a cause and an effect. But for me, it's so clear now. Like, I'm having a negative thought about somebody, which might even seem like it's really well deserved, and then I hit myself with a knife, and I cut, oh man, I'm bleeding. And there's thousands and thousands of different ways that these things can happen. And you don't even have to wait very long. So you have these traditional viewpoints that are telling you that that's crazy, that you're crazy, this is impossible. And if you get seduced by that stuff, somebody who's in that mindset will watch a video like this and say, I can't believe you got sucked in by that BS. I can't believe you're naive enough, you're gullible enough to believe this. But if you really start to observe your life, karma should be one of the most obvious things. And also, don't get stuck on the punitive model of karma. Remember that karma is good. All you have to do is be nice. All you have to do is smile at people, make them feel happy, do things to spread love and spread joy, and guess what's going to happen? You start making money. If you really want to get to the secret, remember that movie? It's not just about that the universe is a cosmic gumball machine and you just write down a check for $1 million to yourself and put it on the refrigerator and it's going to happen. A lot of people tried that after they watched the movie. It didn't happen. Except that Most of the people who were telling you it was going to happen were selling the idea that it will and making money that way. Isn't that interesting? The secret really is about karma. The amount of prosperity that the universe gives to you is going to be authorized based on how much you do for others. It really is that simple. And if you start applying these principles, if you learn not to judge people, if you learn not to get angry and get your dander up when somebody upsets you, if you learn to just let things go, to calm down, if you have a typical reaction that you normally have, you step back, no, it's good, I'm good. I'm not going to do what I usually do. Even though that person is being unloving to me, even though that person has judged me, I'm just stepping back. I'm not going to do the same thing I usually do. I'm just going to breathe for a second, take in some breaths, figure out what I'm doing, figure out what I think. And when you go there, when you embody that deeper level of evolution, really good things happen. You start making more money. You start having more friends. You get the love that you want. If you create a loving space within yourself, someone will come into that space. That's how you attract the love you need. It's by becoming love. It's by being a loving person. It seems so simple. It's like the same thing with a job interview, right? I learned how to master job interviews. I could basically nail almost any job interview I got. And the reason why is the people are not really interested in your skills. If you got the interview, your skills are good enough. You wouldn't be in that interview if they didn't think you had the skill. The reason why you get the job in the job interview is because they want to hang out with you, because they like you. So that's why they say you got to dress up real nice. That's important. But more important than that, maintaining the eye contact, being relaxed, being funny, making those people feel like, yeah, I really want to hang out with this person. I like this person. So that's the key. But this also relates to the subject of ascension. There is a deeper spiritual class here. The world seems to really suck right now. There's so much stuff going on that's so upsetting. And in the law of one system, it says the world is an illusion. Wait, David, what are you saying? It's an illusion. I'm saying that the world is conspiring to teach you about universal awareness. The universe is giving you this hologram where most of the people are asleep. Most of the people don't get it. They don't realize that there are these hidden spiritual forces that you're never going to see. They always use mystery. They don't come right out and hit you over the head. They give you clues, and you have to have the inspiration to follow the clues of mystery towards a destination. And when you go through those clues, you start to realize, you know what? There is some loving entity. There's some loving force guiding me through life. And when I do loving things, good things happen. And when I do negative things happen. It seems so simple, but so many people still don't get it. So let's say that you are getting it. Then what ends up happening to you is that you learn that there is a greater graduation going on. That's what ascension is all about. Spiritual growth has a destination. There's a point to all this. There is an ultimate goal of what you're doing and where this is taking you. And it is to transform. You're not going to reincarnate. You're not going to keep coming back and coming back and coming back. You get the whole class. You get what you're here for. This third-dimensional reality was supposed to teach you something, and you learned what that is. You apply the knowledge, and you move forward with it. And now you don't need to repeat this classroom. You don't need to be suffering. You don't need to be betrayed. You don't need to get robbed. You don't need to be raped. You don't need to be terrified. Because life in those higher realms is not like that. You don't feel those kinds of emotions anymore. That's what this stuff says. So there's a very interesting precedent in the ancient teachings about this, about the concept of ascension. And specifically, there's two different ways to ascend. It's taken a long time, a lot of scholarship to really nail this thing down. The type of ascension that most of us will be going through is not the rainbow body activation. Because it says in the law of one, if you really do your homework, you can ascend whenever you want. But you go on a much higher level. Most of us are just going from third density to fourth density, which, believe me, that's good enough. I don't know why everybody wants to leapfrog over 4D and go right into 5D. That's not how it works. Unless you're an ET soul, in which case maybe it does. And that's a whole long discussion in the law of one, too. If you're going into fourth density, that's a great thing, and most of us are doing this in conjunction with a solar event, a solar energy release, which happens cyclically after 25,920 years. That's a long period of time. The purported end of the cycle was December 21st, 2012. Obviously, it did not happen then, but all of the signs are that this event is coming. It's just that the time window is not as precise as it's striking on the hour of the clock of the day. That it is still something very real. We are seeing a ramping up in the world. We are seeing all of these things in which the illusion is breaking down, in which we are seeing through the veneer. We are seeing through the cracks of reality. We are learning the truth of our existence, of who we are, of what we're doing here, and of where this is going for us as a planet. And that is so exciting, because part of it is this concept of the tribunals and the arrests. I believe this is going to happen. I've spoken to multiple people in the Alliance, okay? And when that happens, we will learn on a collective level. There will be no blinders on anymore. That there was a very dark international force, a biblically evil force that was running the planet. Chucking out censorship like it's nothing. Blocking you, demonetizing you. And then things that are far, far worse, deploying weapon systems into the food supply. Deploying weapon systems into our reality. Setting things up to look as if it was blamed on a patsy when in fact there was a deeper cause behind violent events that occur. When you really get it, you realize, wait a minute, this is exactly like what the ancient religious texts were talking about. And the Bible's only one example. A worldwide evil force, very powerful, that you really do have to follow along with it to some degree in order to be alive. You have to play the game. You can't live in a cave. You have to drive a car. You have to burn gasoline. You have to spend money in order to eat. But that doesn't mean that it's all going to hell. This is the tool. This is the illusion. So when the illusion breaks down, the illusion of mainstream consensus thought, the illusion that's been manufactured for you, then you start to see things differently. You realize all of the teachings that you've had, all of the beliefs that you grew up with, were manufactured for you by opinion makers who controlled the media. They're not doing that now. I can say whatever the heck I want on this forum, as long as I don't get blocked or they take the video down. But that's the way it was. The authorities told you what to believe, and now we're learning, well, actually, there's probably a lot more going on that I didn't see. There's probably a much deeper level to this, and if the full scope of the evil that you're learning about, if you've been studying this stuff, if that's true, and you have any sense of a belief in a positive universe, good karma, dreams that have given you an inspiration, then you have to see that there's a positive to balance that negative. There's no way that that much negativity could exist unopposed in the universe, with it being a fundamentally benevolent universe. There is a plan for this. This is allowed to happen. We, on a collective level, our free will determines when we go through this transition, when we are ready for this solar flash, this ascension process. So now I want to talk to you about these ancient prophecies, because the ancient prophecies nailed the solar flash, and we're already an hour in, so I want to make sure that this doesn't go on too long. But let's go through some of these now, because this is very exciting stuff.